Hey everyone, it's Emily with Spiceworks. Thanks for tuning in today and joining us on another Spiceworks Partner webinar. Master of Disaster, DR for VMware, Hyper-V, and AWS. That actually works. Brought to you by Zerto. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that the webinar will be recorded. So if you have to step away for any reason, you will get an email with a link to the video in about a week. Also, there's a Q&A box on your screen to the left. I encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to those questions at the end via a verbal Q&A. But if your question isn't addressed live, Zerto will be able to follow up with you. So now that all the housekeeping is done, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Darren Swift, Solutions Engineer with Zerto. So Darren, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thank you, Emily, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So my name is Darren Swift. I'm an SE based in the UK, covering EMEA for Zerto. Okay, so my name is Darren Swift. I'm a solutions engineer here at Zerto. These are my contact details on the screen, which you can see at the moment. It's just darren@zerto.com. And if there are any questions as we're going through, both Emily and a colleague of mine will be looking at your questions and bringing them up at the end. When IT goes wrong. So it doesn't matter whether this is planned downtime or unplanned downtime, the result is always the same. Now, what I mean by planned or unplanned downtime is planned downtime could be maintenance upgrades, power upgrades, migrations even, DR testing, and unplanned is classified as natural disasters, outages, floods, situations which are beyond your control. Okay. And basically what I want to go through here is what Zerto is actually doing. Now, I'm not saying at any one point that Zerto is here to take over backup. And I always like to just cover this disaster recovery versus backup slide. So at the top here, we have the items that you need to consider during a disaster recovery or a backup. Now, a backup is great because you would typically take them every 24 hours, as the bottom bar indicates there. And you take these every 24 hours and you store them either on disk and then stage them to tape. And then you may also archive them off-site later on. Now, as I said at the start of this slide, I'm not here to say that backup we are replacing, because we are not. Backup still has a place in the industry, and it's great for long-term retention, keeping your data for so many years due to certain compliance regulations and laws. The next bar up that you see is the next level of protection which you may offer in your environment, which is snapshots. Now, snapshots are often complementary to backup, and you may take them more frequently than your backup, say every 4 hours, where you have a application level or a storage LUN level snapshot technology, and you're taking a point in time which you can revert back to. My whole point with this is that the backup and the snapshot technology are both points in time, staged apart. The backup is 24 hours apart. Your snaps may be 1 hour or 4 hours apart, or even further, depending on the application performance impact which you can sustain. The bar at the top is Zerto. And Zerto does continuous data protection. Now, I will say this, and I'll keep referring back to this during the presentation, that Zerto does not use snapshots. And we do continuous data protection. So we are taking points in time continuously throughout the day. And I will show you how we do this later on in the presentation. Just with the top figures there, this means that you are getting very aggressive service levels. The downtime is very, very minimal. There's no performance impact. And the last thing that Zerto does is we automate a lot of the manual processes that you would normally associate with disaster recovery. Okay, so the next slide here. This is a case study. It's Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital. It's an account which is close by to me. they were looking at Zerto, even though they had a disaster recovery solution in place already. Essentially, they had a patient record system which was very manual, pens on paper, updating, and then being placed into the system later on. They brought around a new application. It required more aggressive service levels. They was doing storage-based LUN replication at the storage layer below. And the thing that struck me most about this is that this is a storage, it's a physical world, and Zerto is designed for a virtual world. Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital were virtualized, and they was not marrying the two technologies together correctly. And as the patient record system took off and was great, they realized that the criticality of this application has gone upwards, and any downtime would directly affect any patient experience that they have. So DR became critical for them, even though it wasn't before. Now, they was looking at storage-based replications, they was looking at some of the solutions from our competitors, and what they wanted was flexibility. So number one on their list was they did not want vendor lock-in. As you know, if you buy a storage array, then you need to buy a compatible storage array to replicate on the disaster recovery side. Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital didn't want that for very obvious reasons. You can save money, you can reuse older or existing equipment, and you can move the data between them. They also required non-disruptive disaster recovery testing. And by non-disruptive, I mean it can be done by a small team of people, can be done at any time of the day, and my production replication is not impacted whatsoever. And this is what we actually won Best of VMworld 2014. This award was for the best virtualized disaster recovery solution, and this customer is referenceable, obviously, and it's a great way to introduce Zerto of why we are used, because we are storage agnostic. We can go between different protocols, we give aggressive service levels, and we can do non-disruptive disaster recovery testing. Okay, so in a nutshell, Zerto does it provides business continuity and disaster recovery solutions for both the data center and the cloud. And it doesn't matter which or what. It doesn't matter if you are a small company or a very large company. Even if you're protecting 1 or 5 VMs up to 5,000 VMs, the problem still remains is replication has been traditionally designed for physical systems. It's been based on LUNs, so you are migrating that entire LUN regardless. And then when virtualization came along, we have products such as VMware SRM, which understands the virtual world very well, but still relies on physical replication below. So again, you have to manage two technologies and bring them together in order to get one solution. These are some of our customers that are on here. We have many more customers' references and case studies online, which we will provide the links at the end of this webinar to you. And the company is growing hugely. Already this slide is outdated slightly with the more customers that we have acquired. And a lot of the cloud service providers you see there as well provide disaster recovery as a service to their end clients. So me as an end user, I could go and consume someone else's infrastructure for a set fee per month, and I have a disaster recovery solution. So basically what we've done is we've moved both replication and the automation engines into the hypervisor layer. Now, just quickly going back to Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital, that gives you some significant advantages. You are no longer reliant on storage-based technologies or vendors. You can replicate between different protocols. So they do not have to be on the same protocols. You may be going from block to NFS or vice versa. And we also wrapped in an automation layer there as well. And by automation, I simply mean we have automated all of the manual tasks you would normally associate with failing over virtual machines. So this is failing over the machine to the other side, bringing that machine alive, attaching the disks, doing re-IPs, change MAC addresses, and pre and post scripts. Zerto is essentially designed to be two things. It's very, very simple and, very, very efficient in its use. I once heard someone say that disaster recovery was, a necessary evil. It's one of those things that we need, but we don't want to necessarily spend weeks and months fine-tuning the runbooks, fine-tuning our time into doing this. So Zerto has been designed from the ground up to be this. Okay, so just moving on. Zerto is software only. We are a software only company. We are storage agnostic, as we have covered. And in the 4.0 release, which I'm actually going to show you today after this presentation, I have a demonstration. We are hypervisor agnostic as well. Now, this is part of Zerto's continuity platform. Basically, we're software only, so we align with the software-defined data centers and structure of the world. You just get software, there is no hardware. We do not sell you professional services. Again, in a software-defined world, expensive consultancy fees and aspects that you have ongoing with existing vendors are a thing of the past, and the software is installable in 1.5 hours, which I'll cover later. We're storage agnostic, which I've already covered, and we're also hypervisor agnostic. Now, with Hyper-V becoming more and more, having more and more growth in the marketplace, and purely down to cost, really, whenever I ask my customers, they say that they are looking at Hyper-V based on cost. So there's going to be some parts of the business that are using Hyper-V, some parts of the business which are using VMware. Zerto doesn't care. We can replicate between those technologies. We can replicate between Hyper-V and VMware, Hyper-V only, VMware only, or either or into the Amazon Web Services cloud. I'll touch on this when we get on. But that gives you some significant advantages, and we're the only one in the marketplace at the moment who are doing cross-hypervisor-based replication at this level. So just a quick look at the actual Zerto 4.0 interface. I will cover this in the demonstration. But what you should know for 4.0 is we have updated the interface significantly. If you've seen or heard of Zerto before, you may have seen an older interface which was based on Flash technology. The new interface is completely designed to be HTML5 and is designed to be completely and utterly simple and straightforward to use. This interface is designed to be placed on a screen or a tablet within your data center, and you can instantly look and see how your data center is performing in respect to disaster recovery. So, in other words, am I meeting my SLAs? What RPO do we currently have? And what is my topology and throughput and different metrics? But I will cover this as we go through the actual demonstration. So when we just look at the data center topology slide here, typically Zerto has always done VMware to VMware. And we have been doing VMware to VMware replication now for 4 years. So we've always been heavily invested into doing the VMware replication. And we've done this very, very good. But as I said in the previous slide, Hyper-V has come along and it's made us sit up and look and say, well, perhaps we should do something with Hyper-V. So we go from VMware to Hyper-V, V to Hyper-V, and then Hyper-V to VMware. Now, it's important to realize at this point that Zerto is replicating the blocks of data. It's only when we choose to interact or do something with that data that we need to convert the files. But we actually convert these on the fly for you. So to give you an example, a VMware VMDK file is converted to a Hyper-V VHD file on the fly. So it's done in real time. There is no delays as we do this. We're actually in testing of this at the moment, which is 4.0 beta. And this has been pushed out to our existing customers and partners, available for download. And it's been met with some great success. And we're looking to go general availability around April of this year. With the cloud topologies, I mentioned my slide before, Zerto does both enterprise and cloud disaster recovery. With the cloud topologies, we have our existing cloud partners down the right-hand side there. Hopefully you can see and recognize these if you may be using them already. But with Zerto, we introduced the Amazon Web Services. Now, for our existing cloud partners and other people, people may look at this slide straight away and say, well, why are you supporting Amazon Web Services? Well, think of it as this. If you were a smaller company, a medium, or even an enterprise company, and your objective for the year was to shut down some of your data centers and consume disaster recovery or backup as a service in the cloud, with Zerto, you could actually replicate from your enterprise data center into Amazon Web Services, and you could make use of the actual per gigabyte memory usage that per the OpEx-based model that you have in Amazon Web Services. So you do not have to have a huge CapEx spend on the initial outlay and then the power and the ongoing cost that you need to run a data center. So it's a very compelling story, and some cloud providers are also looking at this and saying, hey, well, you know what, we could white label this. We could provide disaster recovery as a service to our existing customers, but leverage some of the great or the huge compute and storage that Amazon Web Services has as well. Okay, so let's actually have a look at what Zerto is doing here. So with Zerto, what we actually do is we've got a primary and a secondary data center. Now, throughout my slide deck, I have a primary and a secondary data center. Now, this is just for the sake of ease on the slides. It doesn't mean that we're limited to 2 data centers. We can have more. So we are doing hypervisor-based replication. And what we are doing is we're replicating your virtual machines across IP to the secondary data center. As you can see, the symbols below, we, again, are storage agnostics. You could have really modern flash storage in one side and slower older disk in the other side. This, again, is just emphasizing the storage agnostic. So we're an asynchronous technology, which means that we're not bound by latency. So we do not have to be within certain milliseconds, such as synchronous technologies, between the 2 sites. At this point, we have an RPO of seconds. So this means we have a recovery point objective of just seconds. And this is really key with Zerto, because if you think of asynchronous technologies, it becomes more apparent and easier to use. With asynchronous technologies, you do not have to acknowledge the writes as they come through, which I'll cover in more detail in the more technical section. And it also means that you can have more cost-effective lines between your data centers, and you can move your data centers or have them across different parts of the country, across continents, should you wish. Obviously, the further you go, the more latency is increased, and your RPO will go upwards. But Zerto shows you this in live, in real time as well, which is really great, and I will show you this in the actual demonstration. So I mentioned on my slide before that Zerto does continuous data protection, and I also mentioned that we do not use snapshots. And I will show you how we are intercepting the I/O at the hypervisor layer as we go through. But with this, we do not have snapshots. We are replicating your data over an RPO of seconds and we are replicating your data into what we call a journal file, which is here on the right-hand side of the screen, with the word journal underneath it. Now, going back to the continuous data protection messaging, it means that we can store all of the rights within your data center, within your applications, and we are storing them every few seconds with the RPO. Now, what this means is we're storing the changes only that your applications are making in the primary side, in the secondary side. This journal file can be from 1 hour all the way up to 5 days. And if you do have it for 5 days, let me just put that into context, it means you can have points in time that you can roll backwards to every few seconds within that journal for up to 5 days. So your service level is hugely increased, and it means that you can rewind and fast forward through that journal as you see fit. This is really a key to how Zerto works. And a key point to understand here is that the journals are thin VMDKs, so they are they grow and shrink automatically, change rates of your applications. What we actually do and how we encapsulate your applications is another key. We're very much aware that one virtual machine does not represent one application. You may have 5 virtual machines, you may have 500 virtual machines which create an application. With Zerto, what we do is we group your applications into what we call a virtual protection group. Now, the reason that we do this is to ensure consistency across the servers. So if we take a very simple CRM application, using CRM because I will relate back to this in the demonstration. You may have a database server, a file server, a web server, and an application server, maybe with a load balancer in there somewhere as well. What we'll actually do is we'll group all of those together in a logical construct within the set. And what we ensure is right order fidelity right across those virtual machines. Now, what this gives you, it means that using the journal technology, those 5 virtual machines, I can recover them to the exact same point in time across all of those servers. So if I want to roll back to a few seconds ago or up to 5 days ago, I have that flexibility. And this is really powerful for how Zerto is built. Going back to my slide before, I was contrasting between physical and virtual worlds. Zerto can pick up your virtual machines off direct attached storage, shared storage, different arrays, different LUNs. They do not have to be on a LUN level. We do not operate on a LUN basis. We look solely at your virtual machines, which again gives you another operational benefit of not having to migrate your virtual machines prior to implementing a DR strategy. Now, with Zerto, what we get is a continuous data protection. And I will cover this window in the actual demonstration. But the key of this is our first glimpse into the journal technology. This allows us to look at the different points in time across the application set which we have. And it allows me to rewind and fast forward. Out of the box, Zerto does crash consistency, which means that we take checkpoints every few seconds. We do not halt the application at all through there. We simply are doing a clone of that write. And we also support application consistent points in time should your applications require this, such as VSS or Oracle Hot Backup mode in Linux. What I will say about this is a customer story of mine. I'm a large telecommunications company over here. We're using Zerto. They were insistent that application consistent point in times were highly beneficial to them, and they wanted it. So they set them up. They did 6 application consistent points in time per day, and they was also collecting the crash consistent point in time which Zerto was doing as well. What they soon realized was that there is no difference between the application consistent and the crash consistent point in time. aside from obviously application is flushing the writes out of memory down to disk, they found that their application teams and members would prefer to have a copy of the data from just a few seconds ago rather than my last application consistent pointing time 4 or 2 hours ago, because you are minimizing your data loss. Also, with application consistent pointing time, you are pausing the application and then causing users. So Zerto built the journal technology, and it is extremely clever in how it works. Zerto may look very, very simple from the outset, very simple to use, but I assure you it's very intelligent underneath with the algorithms which govern this journal. It allows it to have a consistent point-in time across all of your servers. With the Zerto interface as well, you also get comprehensive reports. And are reports based on either resources, and this can be WAN consumption, IOPS, RPOs, and RTOs. Essentially, every virtual machine we have within Zerto, we can see its usage. So we can report to your end customers or departments on the usage of the metrics that it's using. Our cloud partners, going back to my slide before, they use this for billing to their end customers. They have resources, they see what the customer has used, and then they push this out to their end customers. Obviously, they push it through a billing engine of some description and wrap around their billing and metrics around it. We are just supplying you the raw data. More importantly, in here we have recovery reports, which allows us to simply log whenever a failover or a failover test is done. Now, this is key once you get into the demonstration because it allows you to go with a report or automate this report being sent to your line manager, your boss, department, or customer, and you say, well, this is my recovery time objective. It takes me so many minutes to restart all my systems. This is my last test. This is the point in time I selected, and this was the output. So it's very, very powerful in that regard. Okay, I'm just going to walk through some of the more technical aspects with Zerto now. So we've done quite a lot of the overview and what Zerto is and isn't. And I'd just like to show you some of the actual components that we have within Zerto here. So just building out this slide here, I have my primary and secondary data center, as I had before. And I have a vCenter at each site. You'll also notice, just again to highlight the Hyper-V, I have Microsoft System Center Virtual Machine Manager there as well. Now, looking at this slide is not a hard and fast requirement that we need a vCenter at each site. We can replicate with only one vCenter, but obviously 2 is more beneficial because it means that you are more, you're better against the risk. So we can see the 2 data centers here, which I've got. And the first component that we actually install is the Zerto Virtual Manager. And the Zerto Virtual Manager is deployed and looks into the interface. So its sole job is to look into the vCenter. The ZVM installs on a Windows virtual machine with 2 vCPUs and 4 gig of RAM. The reason we install it on a separate machine is we install a very small database at the back end, which is completely automated. You do not have to set it up, and we just store the configuration information. The ZVM's pure job is to look into vCenter and understand what virtual machines, networks, data stores, and repositories you have in vCenter. We install a ZVM per site, and I define a site as whenever you have a vCenter. So I've got 2 sites there and 2 ZVMs. I said before that the Zerto can be installed within 1 hour and a half. This is actually bending the truth a little bit. I can install Zerto within 45 minutes. The ZVM, you point it to the IP of your vCenter. We require an admin credential to install. And we install the 2 services in the Windows machine. We fire them up and running, and then you can access the Zerto browser or GUI. And if this ZVM install takes you more than 10 minutes, then there is some network connectivity or we're doing something very wrong in the environment. So on the next part of this, the ZVM, the next part to install is the virtual replication appliances. Now these are automatically, you select them to be deployed from the ZVM. So the VRAs, if the ZVM is responsible for the management aspects of Zerto, the VRAs are what are doing the compression and also the replication to the other side. So the VRAs are very much responsible for that element. The VRAs themselves are very small machines. They are 1 vCPU, 1 to 3 gigs of RAM. And the reason that we install them on each ESX host is very, very simple. We want them to be able to understand the VMware HA, VMware DRS, storage vMotion. Your VMware administrator should not be limited by replication, so we install them on each node. Therefore, your environment can operate as per normal. As you can see at the bottom left hand of this slide here, the maximum number of virtual machines per Zerto Virtual Manager we can support is 5,000, and each VRA can handle up to 500 virtual disks. Now, to put that into context, that means that you could have 500 virtual disks presented per ESX node. I haven't run across anyone who's doing that as of yet, but you can see the scale that Zerto has in this element. And we are doing compression across the two sites I mentioned before. It's an LZ4 algorithm. We typically see 50% plus compression. If you are using edge devices such as riverbeds or any other hardware device, we recommend turning off Zerto compression, as there's no point compressing the data twice. Very important on this architecture installation slide here to understand that during the install, at any time, Zerto does not require a reboot. We do not require hosts to be placed in maintenance mode. We are designed to be installed completely in production environments. In fact, I encourage my customers to install in production environments and upgrade in production environments, because we are not disruptive to the applications. We do not require outages, planned downtime, like I said before, for upgrades and migrations. You can simply use those to be placed in this environment. I encourage my customers during POCs to try this out and get a feel for how Zerto behaves in their production environments. Okay. So just moving on to the next slide here. The replication engine within Zerto, I always get questions around how are we intersecting the I/O? How do you see the I/O coming from the VMs at the hypervisor layer? And if we just build this slide out here, you will see what we are doing is we're intersecting the virtual machine's I/O coming down to either VMDKs, physical or virtual RDMs at the bottom. And we are cloning out this write into the VRA, which is then compressed and replicated to the other VRA and placed within the VMD in the journal on the other side. Now that journal operates on a first in, first out basis. So if you think of this as a file system on a cycle, the first write in will be the last write out. So it means that if you write a change at midnight and it's got an hour of timeline, at 1 a.m., that change write will be ejected from the journal. As I said before, the journals can be tuned up and down between 1 hour and 5 days. The actual disks at the bottom, we can use VMDKs, physical or virtual RDMs. Anything that is basically visible within vCenter, we can see it and we can replicate it. So this is great for obviously SQLs, Oracles of the world as well. And it's very important to understand as well on this slide that we are doing a clone, not a split of the I/O. So at no point in Zerto's architecture do we have to start acknowledging that we've received the writes on both sides of the replication and send acknowledgements back, because that introduces latency to your applications. As I said before, we are designed to be completely, as invisible as we can be to your applications as to cause no latency whatsoever. One of the key things I always get asked with this is continuous data protection sounds great. It sounds phenomenal. But what happens when an element in my environment fails? This could be a bandwidth contention. It could be virtual machines going offline, such as the VRA, or it could be a virtual machine writing a huge amount of data to the actual virtual machine disk below. So with this, what Zerto actually does is we go into something which is called Bitmap sync mode. Now this is great because what we are ensuring is if we have any of the following that you can see in the animations here, if we have any following outages or downtime, Zerto can recover. And the way that we do this is we create an 8 megabyte bitmap in host memory. Now this is actually reserved upon the install of the VRA. And what we actually do is this 8 megabytes bitmap in host memory is on the ESX host. And what we are doing is we are tracking the blocks below. So if the bandwidth link has gone down, technically I cannot send my changes from my primary to my secondary data center. Now that's an issue, and it's something that Zerto have obviously thought about before they designed such a solution. And this bitmap host file is designed to track all of the storage blocks below and allow us to simply track what has changed. Now it is intelligent. I always get asked at this point, well, you could, what if I'm down for 1 day, 3 days, 5 days? The idea with the bitmap in host memory is it is just a pointer. It is simply a pointer pointing to the blocks below saying block 001 has changed to this block. If we see an entire disk that has changed, we mark it down as one disk. We do not track every single block on that disk. And as time goes by, we roll and amalgamate these together, which governs this. So we haven't got a timeline on it. You can run as long as you like in this mode. And this is also what makes us very efficient with low bandwidth environments. Our minimum bandwidth is 5 megabytes that we have to have between the two sites. But we have customers that are using less than that. And the bitmap sync ensures that we are still capturing the writes from the virtual machines and sending them over to the secondary site when that site becomes alive. So when the issue is resolved itself, either by manual intervention or the bandwidth has come alive again, Zerto copies those blocks out of the bitmap, places them to the VRA, sends them over to the VRA on the other side, and then places them in the journal file, and replication is continued. So Zerto flips in and out of this mode automatically, and the only alerts that you would see from Zerto is recovery point objective alerts saying that your RPO is climbing. At this point, you could still revert back to before you went into bitmap sync mode, so you still have your data, you can still recover absolutely. Okay, so what I'd just like to cover now is the two operations that we have with Zerto. So with the first animation on this slide here, we go through a failover. And our failover is great. We take the virtual protection group, which consists of your application. We fail it over to the other side. Now, a failover is I have come in the morning, or I've been woken up at 2 a.m. and my data center is no longer functioning. I need to fail over. We fail over to the other side. We then power on the virtual machines. Well, we do not power on. We register the virtual machines in the inventory on the second side. We attach the point-in-time disks which you have selected. We then do any IP and MAC address changes. If you are using layer 3 networks, you may need to change your IPs. We then connect them to a production port group of your choice, and then we boot the virtual machines in the order which you specified. So you may have a heavier database, which requires a time delay before the web and the front-end servers come up, and that's absolutely what Zerto supports. Now, our recovery time objective is classified as when we have done all these operations for you on however many applications you would like and bring this up on the secondary site. If we just click on the slide again, the other operation that we have here is a failover test. Now, the only difference between a live failover and a failover test is in the wording. A test is a test. Going back to Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital before on my slides, this is how they achieved non-disruptive testing. You can click to test failover at any time, which I will show you in the demonstration. And what this allows you to do is maintain replication from site A over to site B, or primary and secondary in this case, and bring my virtual machines and my applications live in a bubble network. Now, I'm classing a bubble network as a single vSwitch, which allows me to power on the machines, do some testing, and then throw them back. Now, this is great not just only for testing disaster recovery, but this is great for testing logical failures. I can roll back. I can see if I had a security breach. I can roll back just an hour ago, look in the tested failover virtual machines, see if the data is not corrupt in there, and play around with it. Or think like this. You may have upgrades of your databases or applications. If you failover test, we can bring an environment up in minutes, and you can run a patch or an upgrade against that set of virtual machines or that application to ensure that when you do this in production, it is not going to bring that application to its knees in terms of the patches that you're applying. If I just click again, we will see the one-click failback, which Zerto has. Now, this is assuming, going back to the first scenario, that you have failed over. So your site is on fire, underwater, all of the above, and you have been exclusively running out of disaster recovery. At this point, when you get your site rebuilt or it is back online after its brief outage, the one-click failback simply allows you to point replication back to the primary site and also send the changes which have occurred in disaster recovery back to the production site. And we call this reverse protection within Zerto. So what we also have in Zerto here is, upon the failover, we have, excuse me, it's just gone one slide too far. Within Zerto, we have workflow automation for end-user accepted recovery. Very, very simply, this is what I would call an insurance policy. If you come into Zerto and you want to fail over, it will be foolish to fail over just to a few seconds ago and then say, yep, that point in time is correct. I want to fail over and send all of my data. Because we have so many points in time in that journal, we allow you to keep that journal data for a time of your choice. So put this in the real world, this would allow you to fail over, have Zerto automate the manual operations, get your application teams and end users to log in, test the application, and ensure that this is at a consistent point in time before you say, yes, to Zerto, I am happy with this, and then we will commit to that point in time. So it's an insurance policy, and it's a really effective tool when you are doing this. Okay, so my last slide here is Zerto extensibility. A few things which we do. I mentioned our cloud providers at the start. Most cloud providers, or some cloud providers, are using vCloud Director. So we fully support vCloud Director and integrate into it. Another key point that you should know about Zerto as well is we support VMware versions all the way back to version 4 update 1. And you can have different versions of VMware running at each site. So if you have older or legacy or remote office sites which are running older versions of VMware, you can use Zerto to replicate into a newer version, providing that the virtual hardware machine version is recoverable in the newer site. We have a fully functioning REST API which you can use and is published, and you can also automate a lot of the tasks with PowerShell in Zerto as well. At this point in time, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to launch my screen share, and I am just going to bring this into play and actually show you a little bit of Zerto. So I'll just wait for this to turn green for the moment. Okay. So this is the Zerto interface. As I said before, the Zerto interface is designed to be extremely simple. What we see at the top here is we've got a set of numbers. To run this through very quickly, what this means is I have 4 virtual protection groups, so 4 applications covering 8 virtual machines, covering 143 gigs of storage with an average RPO across those 4 applications of 5 seconds. We have some performance information down the left-hand side here, and we have my recent tasks which have occurred here. Now I have 2 sites here. I have Boston and London, both running on VMware, and I have a San Francisco site which is actually running on Hyper-V. Now one of the really cool elements with Zerto here is it doesn't matter which hypervisor we are looking at. It could be Hyper-V, Amazon Web Services, or VMware. You get the same interface. So it's one less task for your end user and admins to learn and understand, and it makes life a little bit simpler. The VPGs are the virtual protection groups. We can see here my virtual protection groups. We have an actual RPO column down the right-hand side, which is ranging from 12 to 14 seconds at the moment. And we can see the applications I have. Just to reinforce the virtual protection groups, my CRM application before, I take all the servers which make up the application and place it into this grouping. You will see here the first evidence that Zerto is replicating a set of data between 2 DCs. We see that this one, CRM App 2, is being replicated over to San Francisco Hyper-V, and you just simply get the Hyper-V logo. We can then go into the virtual machines and the sites that we have. As I said, London, AWS. And we can see the virtual replication appliances which are installed as well. Now, just to show you how easy these are to actually install, a virtual replication appliance is deployed automatically from within the ZVM. There is no creating machines or doing manual OVF imports. Zerto takes care of this for you. You simply come through, select a host and a data store, a network, the amount of RAM you wish to assign to it, and I would recommend giving this a static IP, and hit install. Just to re-emphasize, the virtual replication appliances take around 2 or 3 minutes each to install. And as I said before, if you're doing something very wrong, if the ZVM has not installed within 5 to 10 minutes. We also have monitoring. Zerto shares a lot of the alarms with vCenter, or better put, it sends a lot of its alerts and alarms to vCenter. So if you are doing event monitoring on vCenter, then you can include Zerto within there. But Zerto does log all of the tasks which we perform against vCenter and events should you require to go back through audit and compliance. And lastly, we have the reporting section within here as well. Now, this allows us to pull out different reports, which I mentioned before as well. Okay. So, just bear with me a moment. So, within my different DCs, you can see I have the same interfaces. And just to show you what I've got here, I have 2 vCenters. I'm running the vSphere web client, which we fully support. I have London, and I also have Boston. And we also have a virtual machine manager as well, which we're actually going to fail over into. Just give me my screen back one moment. Okay. So, I mentioned before that we can create a VPG at any one time. And what we're actually going to do just before we do that is we're actually just going to come down to the buttons down here and hit a live failover test. Now, spare me one moment, my screen has gone. There we go. Okay. So at any one time, we can come through and create a virtual protection group. And we can just apply a name to this, and then we can simply pick up the virtual machines which make up my application. And we are creating them in this virtual protection group. As I said before, this ensures that we are consistently recovering all of these to the exact same point in time, right across these virtual machines. So the general best practice is pick all of your virtual machines up, which make up an application, and then you can go through this. We can define a boot order. As I stated before, you may want some heavier virtual servers coming up before others with a time delay. And then we simply point where we would like to replicate to and what data stores we would like to use. So we are simply saying at this point, okay, pick up CRM application 3 and I would like to replicate it to my Boston VMware data center. I can come through and decide what I would like to do with the storage, whether these are RDMs, VMDKs, etc. And we also have the swap disk functionality with it, which is extremely useful for temporary database spaces on databases. So they send transactions in and out all the time, and a swap disk will replicate that data once and once only, therefore alleviating the stress on your bandwidth consumption, because we are cutting down sending changes which ultimately will be overwritten when you restart this VM on the other side. And then we select the networks that I would like to use. Now you can set up what networks you would like in here. And the test network is simply, when I do the failover test in a moment, where I would like these virtual machines to be brought up within my vCenter. So the reason we have a test network is you do not want the application joining the same network as your live application in a test environment. This may cause IP conflicts to start with. It may cause issues in data corrupted. We can also invoke scripts either before or after recovery, such things as DNS updates or whatever scripts you may decide you wish to do. And we can also come through here and decide what happens with the network interface cards as well. So I did mention before that we can work over layer 2 or layer 3 networks. And if you're going over layer 3, you probably want to re-IP your applications at the other side. And this is the tool that would allow you to do this on. We see the volumes and we see the network interface cards of the virtual machines, and you can do bulk edits of these also. When I here, I just hit done, and that VPG goes away and is built. Now, just in the interest of time, I just want to show you a test failover. Now, just a quick point on that. When you go away and you build your virtual protection group, what Zerto will do is it will do an initial synchronization between site A and site B. If you wish to get around that or not have to wait for Zerto to do that, we have a pre-seed functionality, which means that you can restore from a backup, or if you already have a copy of the data on the target side, you could point Zerto to each side and we would send over the changes only rather than all of the data itself. So just within here, I said that we can failover test anything at any time. So I'm going to pick up the entire DC. And this is where we start to see the checkpoint technology. As you can see, I have all of my pointing checked for the latest, and then select next again. Now, what we'll do is entire all the applications I have placed in there into the relevant aspects. So the first one is actually coming to VMware, and we will see that the application is up and running here already. So Zerto has already been through registering these VMs, changing IP and MAC addresses, configuring them in a boot order, and then powering them on. And just to prove to you that these are actually up and running, we can come through here, and these machines are up and running and using. So this is the basic CRM system that I have here. And just to show you that this Zerto CRM application is up and running, which it is. This is a turnkey Linux application which I use regularly on demonstrations, purely and simply because it doesn't require a license, and it's very, very easy to come up and prove that this is running. Now, this is running in a test environment whereby you can do on this, ensure that the data is consistent, and when I close this test down, Zerto will simply come through to clean up all the operations which I have done. Now, we also noted before from our demonstration that I was sending data into Hyper-V as well. And this is the same application which was being replicated into San Francisco Hyper-V. And you'll see that it's the exact same process. So it doesn't matter whether we're replicating into VMware, Hyper-V, or even Amazon Web Services. The end state is always the same. We are able to start these applications, come up and running, and allow us to do some testing within them. So you can leave these machines powered on for as long as you want in this test phase, and the Zerto GUI will continue to replicate this data, and it will continue to allow you to meet your RPOs and your SLAs, and it will ensure that your data is still being run and is consistent. So it's truly non-disruptive DR testing. The only difference between a and a failover, which we went through before, is we have the auto commit feature within here, which I discussed. So if I was going to do a live failover, it would allow me to simply come through and ensure that I am committing, getting the correct point in time for my business. At that point, I am running out of time, so I'd like to open it up for any questions, should there be any. If I just flip back to in here.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. So our first question is from Ian, who first says hello, and then asks, we are a service provider who would be interested in supplying this to multiple client sites. Would it be possible to have these replicate into one Zerto system on our end, or would we need to do one per client?
Hi, Ian. Exactly. So our disaster recovery as a service solution would allow you to have one Zerto instance on your side, on the cloud side, which I would call it. And then you can have multiple clients coming into your one interface, into your one Zerto environment. And the way that we architect this is fully multi-tenanted, and it allows the customer to send their data into you via Zerto, and you can provide disaster recovery as a service. Now, the only thing that you need to do from the customer side is install the ZVM and VRAs on the customer side, and as I said before, that is less than 1.5 hours. And we also, on top of that, Ian, we have a Zerto Cloud Manager, which would allow you to manage multiple customers as organizations. And to cut a long story short, what this allows you to do is to push certain permissions and actions to different customers and also service profiles. So customer A may be paying $500 a month. They are getting the gold service. They have the minimum RPOs and the best service levels. And they can do all the actions, compared to the other end of the scale where they may just be a consumer of your service and are paying the lower end. So absolutely we support that, and I can take you through that in more detail should you wish.
Awesome. So our next question comes from Carlo. He asks, what about Zen servers? Any roadmap for Citrix hypervisor?
So I would like to discuss that with you, Carlos, in greater detail with Zen Server. It's something that comes up quite a lot, and I'd be interested with understanding a little bit more about your Zen Server environment. and then I could give you a accurate description of whether Zerto would work in that environment. If you could take offline, that'd be fantastic because it would just allow me to explore it further and see what you're doing with Zen Server. And I can also give you a little bit of roadmap information on it.
Awesome. So it does look like we have time for one more question. Our question is from Luke. Do you have anything that would fit a small business who is looking to convert a couple of physical servers into VMs, taking the second server offsite for DR?
So yeah, I mean, as long as you have virtual machines, Zerto can work. I mean, we do not have to be thousands and thousands of VMs. You can be a very small amount of VMs. Absolutely, the minimum requirements to install are one ESX node at least per site and a vCenter. So yes, we can absolutely cater for small environments, and a lot of our customers do start off with smaller environments and then build them over time as well with Zerto.
Awesome. Thanks for that great presentation, Darren. And I hope everybody was able to learn a bit more about becoming a master of disaster. Darren, do you have any final words for our audience?
If you do want to reach out and ask any more further tech questions, it's just darren@zerto.com. And if you want to see any of our use cases, references that we mentioned on the start of the presentation, just zerto.com and go to the Our Customers section, and you'll be able to see some more of our white papers, references, and case studies, along with a video section showing you relevant different Masters of Disasters videos, which you can see the software in some greater detail. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Darren. I do want to remind everyone that if your question wasn't asked live, Zerto will be able to follow up with you. Also, if you had to step out or miss any part of today's presentation, you will be receiving an email in a few days with a link to view the webinar on demand. Special thanks to Zerto for sponsoring today's event, and thanks to each and every one of you for tuning in today. We hope to see you back soon for another Spiceworks Partner webinar. But until then, stay spicy.